Good afternoon and welcome to Sunday Brunch with the SIP, hosted by Tracy Sturdivant from the League, Fatima Goss Graves from the National Women's Law Center, Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, Judith Brown Dianis from the Advancement Project, who is not here today, and I am Glenda Carr from Higher Heights. And I didn't really get anything to sip today. I've been working out, so I am drinking water, but grab your cup of tea, your mimosa, your snack. This right here is gonna be we are serving a hot conversation today on the SIP with some amazing guests. And so we want you to, and we're streaming live for the first time on the SIP Facebook page, the SIP YouTube page, the SIP IG page. So welcome to our new home, ladies and gentlemen. And so we need you to share this with your network, which is what I'm about to get ready to do as well. And so tell us where you are watching from, what city, what state, and what part of the house. Again, most of us are in the same place, same location. And so today there's been a lot of conversation about not only the road to 2020, but more importantly, who the Vice President Biden is going to pick for his running mate. And there's a conversation happening around, is it a woman? I mean, we know it's a woman. Is it going to be a white woman? Is it going to be a woman of color? Or today we're having a conversation about Black women Veep Stakes 2020. And we are joined by 3 veteran political strategists, as well as one of our amazing writers and reporters. And we are all gonna be in conversation. This is literally brunch, ladies. All of the hosts and the guests will be in conversation with us. And so I will begin the introductions, but many of these folk, you know. Bishop Leah Daughtry, who has, for those who don't know, there's only been one person. That would be Bishop Daughtry, who has been the CEO of the Democratic National Convention, both in 2008 and 2016. She hosted like the premier convention and for some party. And both in historic years, and has also been advisors to all, from presidents to policy makers across the country. We are also joined by Karen Finney, another senior political strategist and communications professional who have, again, also advised presidents and candidates and elected officials across this country, and is a commentator. And finally, for now, we have another guest joining us later, Erin Haynes, who is the editor-at-large at the new 19th, a new women's vertical that if you are not following, you should. And later on in the show, we will also be joined by, it's kind of like you always have a girlfriend that knocks on the door late for brunch. And that will be Donna Brazile, who will be joining us, who again is another veteran political strategist, but more importantly has been a not only advisor, but a campaign manager to presidents and candidates who will bring a unique perspective. And so that is our brunch, ladies. Welcome to brunch.
Hello.
Hey,
welcome. Glad you walked to join us.
I see Donna joining us now.
Donna ran errands today. She did better than most.
She was on TV this morning speaking the gospel of Black women.
Hello, everyone.
Great. So we want to level set a conversation. Higher Heights recently released a national poll of battleground states that was led by Karen Finney, Cornell Boucher over at Brilliant Corners. And we particularly wanted to debunk a couple of things that we've been having. As I have conversations with my girlfriends, there's been a conversation like, oh, he can't pick some people are concerned that he actually had put himself where he said a woman, and then I was like, oh, it can't be a Black woman. And so we wanted to actually hear from voters about their thoughts about this moment in history. And as we are going to have a woman, accept the nomination for vice president, and we went straight to the voters. I know Mama like, did I slip already on our ambition?
You jumped a step, but hey, I'll take it.
We're slipping on ambition. And so we're gonna let Karen talk a little bit about this poll, because I think it allows those who are watching this to be able to actually hear why many, particularly Black women and others, are calling for a Black woman vice president running mate. This is literally making the case for a Black woman running mate by the numbers. And then we'll spend a little time, because I think oftentimes people actually don't know the process. And so we actually have two, well, really three, but we're particularly in conversation with Leah Daughtry and Donna Brazile about the process. So this is going to be somewhat of a lunch and learn. Some of this is going to be like, we are going to it's a sound off, and an ability for those who are watching to be able to really help shape and continue to talk about the narrative about Black women's leadership. So Karen, you want to share a little bit of the top lines?
You bet. I'm excited to do so. And one thing I want to tell you that is, and good morning, everybody. It's such a joy to be with you this morning. That one of the reasons we did this poll, or Glenda wanted to do this poll, was to ask voters just very directly, Black woman, white woman, because so many of the polls have asked, should race matter? And they've asked about specific people, but really trying to get underneath cultural bias and understand what do voters think is important in this moment. And particularly in this moment where, we are in a unique moment in history because of COVID. We are in this moment of this post-George Floyd racial reckoning. And we've seen the numbers increase in terms of voters across the country supporting Black Lives Matter movement, supporting and understanding that, guess what, racism is real. We could have told you that if they would have been listening. But anyway, so this poll, we wanted to talk to battleground state voters because we wanted to be able to make the case that the voters that Joe Biden needs the most to win, do they want a Black woman? Do they want a white woman? So we talked to voters in Ohio, North Carolina, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Nevada, key battleground states. And what we found was, not surprisingly, first thing I'll say is we found that while Biden definitely has a lead over President Trump, I shouldn't have said president, but Trump, let me just say it that way, that there's still a need to deepen that support and deepen that enthusiasm. And we think that's important because we think this poll also shows that by selecting a Black woman, he can actually increase enthusiasm for the ticket, which we all know will help increase turnout and support. So the most important thing that we found is that among likely voters who are not supporting Trump and are open to voting for George Biden, they want 48% of them want a Black woman. Only 21% think that it's important Biden select a white woman. Let me just highlight that. That is a 27% gap. That's the most dramatic that we've seen thus far. There have been a number of polls that have shown an increase in the electorate of people wanting a Black woman. But again, no one's really asked the question this directly about a Black woman or the choice of a white woman. So then we look just a little bit deeper at some of those, who are those key voters that we're talking about? We're talking about white women. We're talking about millennials and Gen Z voters. We're talking about minority women. We're talking about college educated women. That's a demographic that you hear pundits. I know we talk about all the time on CNN. So we wanted to understand what's going on with those voters. Now, 54% of base Biden voters think that it's important that Biden picks a Black woman as his VP. And within those groups I mentioned, I think one of the most important numbers is that 60% of millennials and Gen Z voters think that it's important that Joe Biden selects a Black woman. That is a larger number than the current support that he has. And so that's part of why we make this argument that says picking a Black woman is the path to victory, because it's going to deepen that support with these voters. Among white women, 48% think that Joe Biden should pick a Black woman. And when we asked about a white woman, again, even a white woman, only 21% think that he should pick a white woman. And again, around with millennials and Gen Z voters, only 27%. So again, we're seeing really large divides in the amount of support that there is for a Black woman over a white woman. And the last thing that I'll point out is that we also wanted to try to understand a little bit of the messaging. What's the best way to talk about this? What do voters resonate with? So we asked a number of different frames, and the two themes that really popped for people is, number one, that by selecting a Black woman, Joe Biden is picking someone who represents a new generation of leadership, the future, and someone who looks like America, and to help him unify our country and move America into a bold future. A Black woman would also bring a lived experience and diverse perspective that reflects the challenges our country faces. So what we take from that is voters, they want a new generation of leadership. They want somebody who looks like America, someone who reflects our diversity and has really lived our challenges. And then the second message that really did well and was real important to people was about making history. And it's interesting because we asked people just specifically, since Biden had said, you know, he's going to select a woman, that's history making. But that wasn't enough for voters. It is the idea of making history by selecting a Black woman. And that is a historic choice. And again, somebody who represents this new generation of leadership. So it's an exciting poll. We've been getting it to reporters all over the place. And I'm happy to say that we also saw a poll on Friday from Yahoo News and YouGov that really supports our results, which shows more broadly across the country, I think it's about 60% of Democrats think that Joe Biden should select a Black woman. So I'll just end with this, Glenda, that one of the things I think is so important for us to acknowledge and to accept, and when we have this conversation, we're not talking about if he selects a Black woman. I think we need to move the conversation to why would he not select a Black woman, right? And I think we also, as Black women, need to also say, I don't know about y'all, but I am tired of being called the backbone. I hated that from the beginning. I want to be recognized as a leader in this party and in this country. And the women who are currently being considered, the Black women, all of them are stellar candidates. They're very qualified. They would do an excellent job to help both win the White House among key demographics and key parts of the country. And they would also be the kind of governing partner that Joe Biden's going to need to enact his vision. So I just think it's real important that we stay on offense in this conversation, because it's gotten a little out of control this past week, and it's gotten a little personal, which is something we see. Black women and women are always attacked on personal traits over qualifications. And again, this poll shows people want a Black woman. It is time.
So before we dig into both the poll and the conversation that is happening right now, I want to make sure that people share again on their feed. This is the first time streaming on the SIP Hour page. So share with your friends, make sure people know about it. So maybe we should also bring in Aaron, because I know you have been tracking and reporting on this, and also Glenda. What surprised you about what was in the poll? Was it the numbers around white women? What was the most surprising thing?
And hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is really such an important conversation. And as we get closer to this decision, I think that this is something that, the chorus is growing louder. That's certainly what my reporting is reflecting, that you can see the call for a Black woman on the ticket as being something that is a priority, frankly, for a lot of voters. And Glenda, you remember you and I were just talking, and what really struck me in thinking about why this matters, why this is really kind of the vice presidency conversation has taken on kind of an outsized meaning this year, is because, the vice presidency, the choice of who Joe Biden is going to pick as his potential governing partner, right? That is a choice that is solely up to him, right? He's talked about nominating potentially a Black woman for the Supreme Court. He's talked about having a cabinet that's reflective of the diversity of this country. But those decisions, him making those nominations, is really not, that's not a choice that's ultimately up to him, right? Those people have to be confirmed in the Senate, and we don't know what the makeup of this Senate is going to be. So really, the vice presidency matters because this sends a signal about what his priorities are and what he cares about and what he understands about the future of this party. And so I think that is one of the reasons why this is something that matters so much more to Black women. We've never had, as you know, obviously never had a woman president, but never had a woman vice president either, and have never had a Black woman nominated for vice presidency in either of the major parties. So this is just, it's hugely consequential for people. And, I think that as we have seen polling that shows that a Black woman is the person that voters certainly would be most excited and enthusiastic about. That is kind of when you started to see a predictable, unfortunately, shift in the tone of the conversation around the Veep stakes.
Yeah, and I don't think it was surprising. It just confirmed what many of us have been saying, right? Which is there's been a lot of conversation. Well, why pick a Black woman when, in theory, African-American voters, and particularly Black women, will be voting for him anyway. And we've been saying that nominating or choosing a Black woman wasn't just about creating enthusiasm among Black women. It was that he was any of the Black women on this longer list, this potential list of four, he said, they actually are all qualified. They bring different lived experiences, different types of qualifications, not only as a running mate, but frankly, as a governing mate. And so the notion that if he actually chose any of the women on this list, that it would not only excite Black women, but would actually galvanize a coalition of voters that he would need to win the White House. And so this poll points to that white women see that a Black woman is someone that they see themselves supporting and voting. And it also, more importantly, shows Gen Zs and millennials, which, as you know, if you put Gen Zs and millennials voting as a voting bloc, they actually are the powerhouse voting coalition in an American democracy. So every fashion of voters that he would need to be excited about his pick. This poll points to them thinking that it not only should be a Black woman, but that it shouldn't be a white woman. And so I think this poll and the polls that have come out since have pointed to that a Black woman candidate actually builds a diverse coalition of voters for her.
And Glenda, I would just add to that too. I think that with the white woman piece, which I think maybe would surprise some folks, that polling is showing so many white women saying that they also would be in support of a Black woman joining Joe Biden on the ticket. I think that part of that is that they have seen Black women leading in the midst of this pandemic in so many different ways, right? So many Black women mayors who you're seeing at the forefront. The dual pandemics of coronavirus and racism. You're seeing Stacey Abrams, for example, who is leading the fight against voter suppression in the middle of a pandemic. And so understanding that Black women are really already out here fighting to save this democracy, I think that is something that's resonating with women even who are not Black, who are saying, oh, wow, like these are women who are governing with the interest of the country in mind. And so maybe they are somebody who is also going to be looking out for me You look at, I mean, unemployment, these eviction, the eviction moratorium that's being lifted, folks. I mean, the safety net that is about to fall out for millions of people, including women who are being, disproportionately impacted by almost every aspect of this pandemic, aside from dying. Seeing Black women kind of standing in the gap for everyone in those moments, I think is making the case even more for their leadership and why he should be choosing a Black woman as his governing partner.
But can I just add one thing to that? Because I think it's also important to remember, a lot of times voters are ahead of campaign professionals, not Donald, not me. But let's be honest about who mostly runs campaigns. And I think sometimes there is this perception that we have to go with the traditional model. There was a time when nobody thought Nevada could become a swing state, right? They thought that, North Carolina was out of reach. And so I think we see that if we show up and we talk to voters and we ask them what they think, they're usually ahead of us. And so I think this poll also shows that the idea that America isn't ready for a Black woman vice president just doesn't hold water.
That's a great pivot point, Karen, to like the historical context here that I want to bring Donna into this conversation, who has been a leader, to your point, not just the backbone, but a leader within the party. And Donna, really want you to help us put Biden selecting a woman, and particularly a Black woman, into historical perspective.
Well, thanks for having me, and it's good to see all of you and hear this important conversation. We know the why it's important to have a Black woman. We also believe that there are several who have, in my judgment, risen to the top of this list and should be on that final list before the vice president makes his announcement within the next 10 days to 2 weeks. As you all know, we've had 45 presidents of the United States. 44 white males, one a Black male, Barack Obama, elected in 2008 and re-elected in 2012. And one could argue that although he had a multiracial coalition, it was the strength of the Black woman's vote. The extraordinary number of Black women who took to the polls in both those two cycles that put Barack Obama over the top and perhaps allowed President Obama to win states that Democrats previously did not win, including, I do believe, Indiana in 2008, when Lake County came in, Gary, Indiana, Marion County, Indianapolis, Barack Obama, it was sealed. And we didn't have to wait up all night to see what would happen on the West Coast. And of course, North Carolina, as well as the state of Virginia. I think Vice President Biden this year has a unique opportunity to put a Black woman who would also help us to achieve a historic turnout. Vice President Biden was the 47th Vice President of the United States. There's been 48. Mr. Pence, of course, is number 48. 4 vice presidents have run for president. George Herbert Walker Bush was the last vice president to become president of the United States. 8 vice presidents ultimately became president because of the death of the president. So for us and for many who support having a Black woman on a ticket, this is a historical moment that I do believe will help enable the Democrats and Joe Biden. Excuse my dog, that's Zora. She always tries to get in our conversations. But I think Vice President Biden would be well suited to not only recapture those 3 states that Democrats lost in 2016. Of course, I'm referring to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, but perhaps more states like Georgia, like North Carolina, can be put into play. And with the tremendous civic engagement of Black women voters, Black women activists, this would be a great time for the vice president, as you all know, with a message of bringing the country together, healing the divides in the country. To have a Black woman, I think, will help amplify his message. Finally, as you know, this is the 5th presidential election in the 21st century. And I would hope that when this chapter of our history is written, we did not write a 20th century narrative about presidential politics, but rather a 21st century narrative. And that would include not only the selection of a Black woman, but governing in such a way where being inclusive and having a real impact on the lives of not just Black women, but all Americans would be at the forefront of what his story and ultimately what his legacy would be if he is, of course, chosen as president of the United States.
So we cannot go further without talking about this narrative that we've seen amplified this week around ambition, right? Around and the history around women in ambition, Black women in ambition. When I hear it, I kind of hear uppity. So what do we do about it in the short term? And how do you think it's shaping what's happening now? Is it shaping what's happening now? I mean, maybe we should start with
Leah,
because I know you've had thoughts.
Leah, that's for you. You're on mute.
Okay, I thought she said she was following up with Donna. You know, it's you're right. What we've seen this week is this talk about the candidates being too ambitious. We've seen people talk about somebody's rubbing somebody the wrong way. These sorts of tropes that are being trotted out right now, which have nothing to do with whether someone has the technical skill and ability, the real qualifications to be the running mate, to be the vice president of the United States. And these are the kinds of things that get rolled out. We know them, we're familiar with them. We know, because this is our life as Black women in America, that the standard is always higher, that you always gotta have one more reference, you gotta have one more point on the credit score, you gotta have one more degree in order to be considered qualified for whatever it is, whether you buying a house, a car, a dog, or just trying to get a job. And and you're right, it sounds like uppity. It sounds like she doesn't know her place. It sounds like who invited you to the party? And it's all very sexist. There's racism involved there. And I think where Black women are today, in this time of our political ascendancy and maturity, we recognize it and now are not afraid to call it for what it is, call it out, address it, and push back on it in a way that I think neither we nor our allies, or perhaps we weren't heard when we were doing it before. But it really has to be something we address, because the irony for me, having worked in this political business for 30 years, is that the entire industry is built on people having ambition. This is an industry where you stand up and say, hello, I'm the best candidate for the job, and let me tell you why. Where you put yourself for, it is the foundation of the entire political enterprise. So now to say that someone is too ambitious is really saying you don't belong in this business. You don't belong in this industry, because every single one of those 9,052 people who got on that stage saying that they could be president is exercising a little bit, not a little bit, a lot. Really, when you think about it, of the hubris of saying, I can be president of the United States. Ambition in that, this whole rubbing people the wrong way. If all the people who were quoted in those stories saying she rubbing people the wrong way, if that was a disqualifier, none of them would have careers. Part of being a public servant, part of legislating, part of leading is that somebody ain't gonna like you. And quite frankly, if everybody likes you, you're doing something wrong, right? You're not making enough trouble if everybody likes you. So it's these double standards that we recognize immediately. This is what's happening, and we gotta put it back, push back on it, and put it in its place, and call it for what it is, so that everybody else, and draw the bright line. Either you see this or you don't. Either you with us or you're not. And if you're not, good, now we know who the enemy is and who our allies are, and we know how to move forward.
Donna, let's bring you in. I mean, I've never met a man who's been called too ambitious. I'm trying to figure out what that looks like.
Well, sorry, I'm adjusting my camera again. For those of us who have studied women in leadership, women in political power, women in gender studies, the notion of women having ambitions, political ambitions, just started about 20, 25 years ago. And let me tell you why. In the beginning, the first group of lawmakers, and of course, I'm not referring to Jeanette Rankin, who was the first woman elected in the 1916 election. I'm referring to a large group of women elected between 1916 and say 1972. We know from history that many of those women who served in office first were selected because they were widows, and they were selected to fulfill the term of their husbands. And then by the 1970s and 1980s, many of the women began to run on their own without having a husband precede her. So the role of ambition throughout our political history has been in trying to encourage women, to persuade women, to inspire women, and to recruit women to run. And as we turn the page into the 21st century, we see another group of evidence that women no longer need to be encouraged. Women are deciding to run because they see things that they want to change, because they want to be public servants, because they understand that in order to affect change, you have to be in the room. And so we've come a long way in the definition of ambition. For men, it has always been about ambition. It's always been about a desire to be a leader. But for women, this entire study and the body of evidence has shown it has taken us well over 100 years to get to this moment. And I often tell my friends when they talk about ambition, I say ambition lies at the heart of service, of people desiring to change, people believing that they too can be part of the process. And as I sit here with books from Shirley Chisholm to Barbara Jordan to many, many others, including Geraldine Ferraro, who I had the honor of working for, Geraldine Ferraro-Mondale campaign back in 1984. I mean, we have reached this destination where we should no longer be questioning women's ambitions, nor should we be questioning the way women comb their hair, how they talk, what they laugh about, because in my judgment, every time we get into these conversations, we're looking backwards and not forward. And again, I think Joe Biden's decision to put a woman on the ticket and to, as you all know, get so many qualified women on that list, it's amazing. It's historic. So take the next leap. Go forward.
And part of it is really these headlines. I mean, I have seen more headlines around Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams, and more, and their ambition. Erin, I mean, part of this is the press.
Part of this is absolutely the press. Somebody should create a newsroom that tries to change that. Oh, wait. Right now. Absolutely necessary. The reality is 3/4 of the political journalists are white and male. 3/4 of the stories written about our politics are written by white men. And so is it any wonder that you would have these tropes being perpetuated cycle after cycle, year after year? You know, frankly, part of the reason why I joined the 19th was because I was covering a primary last year where we were seeing the same narratives around race and gender being perpetuated by a press that didn't really recognize, frankly, the diversity that had come into focus this year. 6 women standing for president, and yet we're still talking questions of electability. 6 women who had never lost a race before the 2020 primary election. You know, questions of likability, still circling these candidates. Questions the kind of questions that you would never get for the men who stood for president this year. And so, you know, I do think that what we are seeing are a lot of these old tropes that are happening in a new day. You know, you have everybody pushing back against these tropes. I mean, I think it was really remarkable to see, for example, Karen Bass not taking the bait when they tried to call her the anti-Kamala in a headline, saying, praising her fellow lawmaker from California and not really playing into that narrative. Stacey Abrams continuing to make the case for why she should be considered for vice president when they called her too ambitious, and they called her, basically unseemly for daring to actually articulate, when asked, by the way, not volunteering this just out of nowhere, why, she would be somebody that could make a good vice president, to Joe Biden. So, I think that it really is, there are thankfully more women of color in journalism, in political journalism, who are really saying, we're not going to be a part of perpetuating these narratives, but also, yes, I think it does help not only for readers and viewers when you see these tropes, calling them out on social media, saying that this is unacceptable. But I really do think that it, now is the time. We don't know who Vice President Biden is going to choose for his running mate, but what we do know is that whoever that woman is, she's going to be vilified, criticized, and demonized for daring to stand for leadership in this country. And so that is something that should be denounced early and often, not only by candidates, the press, voters. It's 2020, 100 years after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which our newsroom is named for, but also with the recognition that there were Black women who were omitted from that full access to the franchise and had to work twice as hard to get it. So I don't think that 100 years later, we are willing to accept, the narratives that are attempted to be placed on us in this moment. And I think that the press would do well not to perpetuate that this year, because there are definitely going to be repercussions.
Yeah. Karen, let me bring you back into the conversation. I mean, part of what we're grappling with, even in this conversation, is that we are being presented with these false choices around a Black woman in this role or any other role. Yesterday, I think, or the day before, I can't remember because time literally has no meaning at this point. Congressman Clyburn made a comment about having a, he said, I think not paying, like we need to pay attention to the vice presidential selection, but not at the expense of other things. And I heard it one way the first time. And then I went back and listened to it again and tried to order in my own mind sort of what he was trying to say, because it felt like a false choice that was being presented to us. And so I think there is this notion that, certainly the vice presidency, it should not be the be all and end all of what Black women get out of a Biden presidency. There's certainly issues, there's policies that we care about. There's a whole host of, crises that are facing this country. Joe Biden talked about putting a Black woman on the Supreme Court. Certainly that's important, but it seems like we are presented with these false choices about a singular role that we might play, as opposed to allowing us to lead in all the spaces where we should actually be leading right now. So is there really a conversation about the choice between the importance of having a Black woman as vice president or a Black woman on the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. And part of what's happening, this is also a media narrative that's being fed, right? That says, and kind of expects us, and this is why it's so important in this cycle as women, as Black women, we are united and we step into our power around this, as my Bishop Leah says all the time, and that we want all the things. Why not? So it can't just be, oh, here y'all go. We're going to give you a little Supreme Court justice. Now go be happy. No. It's not an either or choice. We want VP. We want a Supreme Court justice. By the way, we want some cabinet secretary posts. We want some senior staffers in the White House. We want senior staff and appointments throughout the administration, because we're part of the American fabric, and there is no victory in 2020 without Black women. And so, but I think we have to recognize we are going to have to continue to push that. And I want to go back to something that Aaron said about the media narratives, because having been sort of on both sides as a staff person and pundit, but then having, been inside at MSNBC for a time, part of it is, she's absolutely right. It's very white male dominated, and they don't know. They don't know better. That's part of why it's so important. I mean, they should know better, I should say that. But that's part of why it's so important that we call it out and identify it. And I do think it was, it was very positive to see, and I think it shows the steps that women and Black women have made in the media, that we had so many female journalists, mostly, because most of the men were still, writing stories about, there was one on Friday about, Susan Rice using salty language about somebody who frankly deserved it. But we did see women saying, calling it out and naming it as sexist and racist. And that is something, as Black women, we have to be prepared to do leading up to the selection of the vice president, and then afterwards, and every day afterwards, to have her back and the backs of women, Black women leaders. And I'm going to do a little plug for Glenda right here, because that's part of why what Higher Heights does is so important, that we support Black women, not just when they're running for office, but that when they're in office. And look, support Black women everywhere. But I think we have to call out these tropes, that it's a false choice and somehow we should just go home and be happy and not want more. No one would ever say that about white men.
Man.
Donna, do you want to give your thoughts on that?
No, I think Karen summed it up very well, but she's absolutely right. The media has a narrative, and that narrative is based on covering white male politicians. That narrative is based on, using sports metaphors to describe what is happening day to day. So we focus on a horse race, and we don't talk about the substance of what women bring to the table when they're involved in public service and politics. So it's important that we amplify messages about these women, about what they bring to the table, how the various leadership qualities that they possess, so that we can get an accurate picture of who we're covering and the stories that they bring. Otherwise, we're back on what I call the page of the last century, where it's all about, talking about men, talking about their ideals and their values and their goals without including women and women voices, which I do believe at this moment it's so important to have women voices in this conversation about the future of this country, especially now. I mean, look, we have gone through a great deal with COVID, amplifying all of the, what I like to say, all of the vulnerabilities and inequities in our society. So why not put women at the table? Why not have that conversation with women involved? And why not be led by women at such a time as this? So this is a very important moment, and Black women need to be involved in every level of this discussion. One last thing, if you, I'm sure everyone has noticed this, but whether you're Lori Lightfoot, London Breed, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, LaToya Cantrell, the mayor of my beloved home city of New Orleans, Muriel Bowser, my great friend and mayor here in Washington, D.C., Keisha Lance Bottom, the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, and so many others. I mean, the constant attacks on their leadership, on their principal leadership, on their desire to, be involved in the conversation, whether it's about COVID or about crime and violence. And they're constantly under attack, not just by the media, but also the president of the United States, who tend to pick on those cities and those mayors. The public housing crisis, homelessness, I mean, it's become a fall. And I think it's important that we begin to support those women, support their leadership, and support the kind of actions that they're taking during this pandemic to ensure the safety and health of all of our citizens.
Absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, America can't keep saying, thank Black women when they need us as voters. Applaud us when we are actually, doing the work when we're at the bottom of, the economy and battling a global pandemic. But Leah, had shared a little bit earlier with the brunch bunch. The notion is this, you know, there would have been a tax regardless, but the fact that it is you know, likely that the Vice President Biden is choosing who will be the next president, or at least running in 2024 as the president, being the thing that really fuels what is blocking people's ability to see the possibilities that exist. Leah, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's something that I would want people to be thinking about. I think part of, besides all of the sexism and the racism that is normal and usual for us as women to deal with, I think part of the underlying issue here is that we all know that Vice President Biden is likely to be a one-term president, which means that the person that he selects as a running mate, if all tradition holds, would be the presumptive nominee for 2024. And if we win there, then 2028. So you're looking at a generational sea change by having a woman as the vice president, and then the president, and then the president. But the prospect of having a Black woman in 2024 and 2028, which completely will upset the traditions and of the chattering class and the consultancies that have cemented themselves in Washington. And part of that, I believe, is what's driving this narrative around who's too ambitious, who wants to be the president. Why is anybody raising as a talking point that the person he chooses is not interested in the presidency? That's ridiculous. That has never happened in the history of America. And so now suddenly that's a qualifier that who he chooses is not interested in serving again. That's because some people are afraid that Black women, they're gonna give us the vice presidency and they say, okay, y'all got your little toy. Now we going back to business as usual for 24 and 28. As opposed to this person climbing to be the president of the United States, a Black woman, the presumptive nominee of the party for 2024, 2028, which changes everything.
Right. Drop mic.
I mean, that is one way to look at it, because Leah's absolutely right. I mean, that's as if when Bill Clinton chose Al Gore, he didn't know it, that at some point Al Gore, you know, might have the ambition to run for president. Of course, when Ronald Reagan chose George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, yeah, he ran for president. So this, I agree with Leah, this may be one of the reasons why we hear so much and there's so much chatter out there. I do believe, again, that it's going to help Joe Biden. It's going to help the Democratic Party up and down the ballot. It's going to bring a new generation of voters into the process who may have not been interested in this election. And yes, we're going to have to be there every step of the way to explain and educate people about the right to vote, because as you know, the President of the United States, the current President, Donald Trump, is attacking the very integrity of our election system as we speak.
And that's a great, I want to ask about that, because I think there is this question about how do we prepare? How do we start preparing today for the election? And I think it's also important to note, because I think that we lose sight of this a little bit, that votes will, you know, the first votes will not just be cast 92 days from now. Now, we might be 92 days from November the 3rd, but the first votes will be cast at the end of September. So we are in GOTV right now. So that is a question for all three of you, is what do we do to start preparing today? Not just for Election Day, November 3rd, but for early vote, right? And the process and the rest of the process leading up to Election Day. Karen, you want to start?
Well, I think some of it is actually already happening, which is, you know, we have to do the work of educating voters about their choices, right? About and first of all, there have been battles at the federal level trying to get the resources our communities need to make sure they can do vote by mail. And I'm looking at Fatima because I know she knows a little bit more about this than me, but I'll just tell you what I've been part of, conversations I've been part of. You know, we're trying to get the funds to do it, to make sure that we, you know, people don't have to risk their health in order to vote, which is essentially what they're trying to push us into now. And then, you know, it's a matter of educating voters and doing real aggressive outreach and communication to make sure people understand vote by what they need to do for vote by mail, what those deadlines are, as well as for those states that will have early in-person voting. And I know there were a cluster of groups that got together to really look at what are the things we need to have in place, like the choice between in-person voting in a safe way as well as vote by mail, because some people are just not going to vote by mail. And so, but we're going to try to push a lot of people to do vote by mail, which is of course why the president has been attacking it and attacking the Postal Service, which I think ironically it puts him in a position where, you know, Mitch McConnell and some of the Republicans are saying, you know, hey, we're on the ballot too, don't do that. So there's that whole education piece. And then it is turnout, and whether that, and then mobilization, getting people to remember to fill out that ballot and put it in the mail, to make sure, frankly, that there are places, enough places where people can go and put that in the mail. I mean, that's a whole other kind of suppression that we're seeing going on. And so I think a lot of it is helping to educate our community and our people about what is happening in your state and in your community. What are your options? What are those deadlines? It's very similar to what we would do in many ways for election day, but it's making sure people know, because things are different, what their options are, and then helping make sure they pick an option that works for them, feel safe about it. You know, part of it is also making sure people feel safe and not to undermine vote by mail, because it is safe. And you know, I always think it's ironic when white folks talk about and Republicans talk about in-person voter fraud, because one of the only cases that I know that's ever been prosecuted was a guy in Wisconsin who voted twice for the Republican governor. So I think we have to keep in mind that is, you know, I just love that, right? And so that's a whole other trope about voting that we have to address head on and make sure people have the information that they need to feel comfortable to vote by mail, know how they're going to do it, make sure people have a plan around what they're going to do, and again, knowing those deadlines.
Donna, your thoughts on what we need to do to prepare?
Check your registration status. I believe it's vote.org. Am I right, Leah?
Yes.
Vote.org.
Yes.
Check your registration status. And also encourage your family, your friends, your co-workers, the people that you go to church with, the people that you play bridge and your book club. Explain the importance of voting, especially now during this pandemic. Make a plan early. If you're able to request an absentee ballot, do it now. If you're able to go to the polls or serve as a poll watcher, volunteer now. Everything that we do within the next 30 days will enable us come November 3rd to have a very important and a very strong election this fall. We know that the Republicans are planning to spend millions of dollars in recruiting poll watchers. Don't be, as I told my sister back in 2000, don't get out of line. Bring, if it's required to bring a form of ID along with the voter registration card, do that. Learn as much as you possibly can. And remember what John Lewis said, especially in that last letter that he wrote to all of us. He talked about the importance of casting your ballot and making your voice known. During this pandemic, remember, it's governors, it's mayors who not only appoint public health officials, but it's governors and mayors who make resources available for everyone to stay well and healthy. So this is a very important election cycle for us, but we need to encourage everyone to check their registration status right away.
Leah, last word on this question.
Well, first, we need an enthusiastic electorate, which means we need a Black woman on the ticket as the running mate with Joe Biden to help our people, particularly those of us in our community, to feel excited about going the extra mile to vote, which is what's going to happen. We're facing an unprecedented election cycle where who knows how many millions of people will be voting by vote by mail, absentee ballot that they've never done before. We have no playbook for this. And so we need a candidate who's going to help people be excited and not just cast my ballot, but let me knock on every door on my way to the elevator and make sure they cast their ballots too. Secondly, I would advise the campaigns to look to the models of the movement for Black Lives Matter movement that are happening all across this country, and engage with local organizations, local organizers who know the communities, who know where Auntie Susie lives and Uncle Bill, and have the relationships to be able to knock on doors, to have real conversations. Don't parachute people in. Look at what they've successfully done in this Black Lives Matter uprising by engaging local leadership, getting them engaged, being partners with them to reach to the voters that the campaigns may not be able to reach to. And that's the way that you will be able to, we will be able to be successful in November.
Absolutely.
Well, we will be ready. And if we're not ready, we're going to have to get ready. So before we close out, this week had a lot going on, but likely the most important thing was Congressman Lewis was laid to rest in all of the ways. And I know so many of you guys worked with him over the years, and it would be great to have some final reflections as a way to close us out about this great man. Leah or Donna? Karen?
No, that's my dog. I'm sorry. I'll go first because I feel like Leah and Donna should go last because they will be far more eloquent than I will. But I will say, I had the opportunity in 2011 to join Congressman Lewis on his civil rights pilgrimage that he did every year. And it's an incredible experience because you have some of the freedom riders with you and the freedom singers with you, and they're singing on the bus. And we went from, it was basically a tour of some of the most important stops in Alabama, places in Alabama that, where different things happen. And we would stop and he would tell stories and others would tell stories. And it just, to be able to not just hear him talk, but to hear him talk in context of the places and to feel the mood of what it might have been like. And then they did a march across the bridge the day before the big march. And I know folks talked at the service about the backpack, but it just was always funny to me when he told that story and he would say, I still wonder where that backpack went. And just, he was such a wonderful human being and such a brilliant light and spirit, and someone who, I think one of the people who has most lived their values to the nth when it was really hard. And to my mind, that's the thing that I will take away is you've got to be dedicated and have a discipline of living your values every day and fighting for our people and fighting for all people, because when you lift up Black folks, you lift up everybody.
My favorite John Lewis story, the funeral was everything and moving and helped us remember who he was, and because it felt like him, which I guess it would because he planned it. But my favorite John Lewis story is the one that he tells about when he got to finally wore his parents down and that they would allow him to go to meet Dr. King. And his father took him to the bus with the trench coat and the backpack. And his father said, well, John, since you're going, as long as you're going, remember to get in the way. And that's the story that he told to some of my young people at my church one time, and it's always stuck with me. This idea of don't just be a bystander in your own life. Don't be a bystander in the times that we live in, but make a definitive decision to get in the way of the systems that don't work for you, to get in the way of the oppression that is around us, to get in the way of everything that would stop us, bind us, confine us, to get in the way. And that is our mission in this life, to get in the way, to be interrupters of patterns, of systems, of processes, of confines. And that's the thing that I remember most about him. And that's the lesson that I learned from him, to always be willing to interrupt the patterns, always be willing to get in the way, to make a difference for other folks.
I will always remember him as a kind and gentle soul, a humble man, someone who just cared about people. He loved to sit down with folks. Whether you were in his office in the Cannon House office building and he allowed you to go to the balcony so that you can look at the United States Capitol, or if you're on the campaign trail. My basement here is filled with PSAs and other type of recordings from John Lewis over the years that talked about the right to vote. To John Lewis and his generation, that right was precious. It was the lifeblood of our democracy. I have a picture here of John Lewis with my sister Lisa right over his shoulder, and Barack Obama, as Barack Obama was coming down the steps of the Capitol. That morning when we gathered early, Mr. Lewis saw these signs and the members of Congress right there in what I call the good section, and he saw where the civil rights and all of the activists, and he said, let's move some of these chairs, because he said Barack Obama would not be president had the activists. And Alice Huffman from the NAACP and I helped Mr. Lewis rearrange those chairs. And of course, I allowed my sister to sit behind John Lewis, and he just loved the fact on this historic day, on that historic day, John Lewis got into some good trouble. I'm going to remember that man who was willing to get into good trouble for all of us, for every one of us. God bless his soul.
Yeah. And so in the legacy of John Lewis, and in the voice of Mahalia Jackson, if I can help somebody as I travel along the way, if I can help somebody from doing wrong, we know that John Lewis, that absolutely his life was not in vain. So thank you for joining Sunday Brunch with Higher Heights, powered by the SIP. And thank you to our guests, Bishop Leah Daughtry, Donna Brazil, Aaron Haynes, and Karen Finney for just the beginning of a series of conversations we're going to have about Veep stakes and Black women leading in the moment. So thank you for joining us at the SIP Hour. Your hosts are Fatima Goss-Graves from the National Women's Law Center, Adrian Shropshire from Black PAC, Tracy Sturdivant from the League, Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project National Office, and I am Glenda Carr from Higher Heights. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we will see you on Wednesday for Power Hour at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you.
Don't get into some good trouble.
Good trouble.
Man.
Stir some pots.
I'm about to go.